So another thing that's sort of fascinating to me is looking at the other end of the list and how there are some teams with quote unquote bad salary cap situation that are expected to be good, right? Like the Saints they must still be the favorite for that division, right? I haven't checked the odds, but the Saints are going to be favored for that division. The Buccaneers are going to be trying to knock the Saints off. Seattle made the playoffs last year. Baltimore, we expect to be in the running in that division. San Francisco are one of the class teams in the NFC. The Browns can contend if they get their quarterback back on track. I guess my question is, have we reached a point where sort of salary cap hell in the way we all imagine it or the way it used to happen, we're kind of beyond that as a league? Like, it's possible, obviously, to drive yourself into an absolutely disastrous situation. But unlike, when free agency first became a thing, clearly the league had no clue how to manage this, right? And teams very quickly ran themselves into all kinds of trouble and had these complete purges where they just had to gut the roster. The whole thing had to be torn down because they didn't know how to manage it properly. But now, years later, decades on, you manipulate it in different ways. There's a difference in terms of approach, whether you pay off the credit card or whether you let it ride. But fundamentally, we all know how to deal with this now. And the only difference is sort of pushing gas or turning up the gas when you have a real quarterback and a real window versus dialing it back when you don't.
I think that's the biggest thing, is that the team's honesty with themselves. And frankly, I think this could be owner driven, or, front offices convince the owner to look at it this way more than anything else. But we'll also say the Seattle Seahawks were like most surprising. I was shocked they were 28th on this list. I'm obviously extremely bullish on Seattle. Anyone who listens to the forecast knows that. But here's an example, though, and they will skyrocket up this list quickly. The reason why they're that low is because both starting tackles were rookies last year, so they don't show up that well. Both cornerbacks are, a rookie and a sophomore. Their edge rushers are either all young. Uchenna Nwosu is a good player, but every other guy is a rookie contract guy that hasn't really done much yet. Anyway, a couple years ago, I think, and obviously Seattle, with Russell Wilson was a particular situation. But if they tried to keep pulling at that thread and saying, we're going to stick with Russell Wilson and try to figure this thing out, not have all this extra draft capital to add all these incredibly talented players they had the last two drafts, they would be in a horrific situation. But I think in today's NFL, you have cover, and you're able to say, no, let's trade our franchise guy, even though he's, 31, 32 years old. We need to kind of start things over and kind of reset the books. And I just don't think you saw that, a couple of years ago. So, the Rams obviously are 30th on here. They have our worst roster in the NFL, which is shocking considering, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Donald factor into that number. But they do deserve credit. They're going to stink this year. But if they were like, let's see if we can get through it and get healthy and keep Jalen Ramsey and keep Leonard Floyd and keep all these guys, keep Allen Robinson, they would, again, kind of be in the basement for a couple of years. But I think teams just kind of, like you said, in both directions. If you're good, you spend a little bit more now, make a big trade, see what you can do. And I think if you're bad, you pull the plug maybe a year earlier than before.
Yeah, I mean, the Rams are a great example of, like, they might have the worst roster in the NFL, top to bottom, but if you were sort of just grading rosters, even at their peak, the roster was never great. It's that they had these stars that could offset a ton of it. And, you could easily imagine a situation where the Rams are not bad at all this year and put themselves in playoff contention. Maybe they're not, capable of rivaling Philadelphia or San Francisco or whatever, but could feature as a legitimate team this season. And they would still have a salary cap that is not in, they're not in that hell situation that we talked about with those teams, in the start of the free agency era. So the Rams have probably done this as extreme as any team in the league in the last 5+ years, and are still in a situation where they're okay, they're fine, right? They're not in a disastrous spot. They're not in salary cap hell the way we all imagine it. It just feels like across the board, the league now has a much, much better handle on how to manage the salary cap top to bottom.
I think it's probably fair. I think they're getting more creative. I think the big one too is not being the sunk cost of dead money. I think used to prevent a ton of moves,
Yeah.
and teams would say, "Yeah, we already have invested this much in this guy, and he's going to count against our cap for 10 million if we move on from him. So why not just keep him and pay a guy $15 million in cash this year that we don't think is even remotely worth that?" And now they're just saying, "No, let's just save as much as we can right now. Let's not let dead cap kind of dictate our decision making and our moves." And the Rams embody that better than anyone. I mean, you trade Brandon Cooks right after paying him. You have Todd Gurley. You trade Jared Goff right after paying him. Like they just said, yeah, it's going to stink. There's going to be a cap hit for a guy that's not here, but we're still saving a bunch of money by not giving him another year's salary. We're just moving on as soon as we think it's the right time from a does his production make him worth this salary number this year? If the answer is no, let's just move on as soon as possible.
And that sum of money is getting bigger and bigger all the time. Like you don't have to go back that far before, a move like Matt Ryan's exit from Atlanta simply would never have happened because of how big that dead cap hit was going to be. And yet now teams are more and more willing to make that monster move, even though the dead cap hit is huge.